Next up is our Superstar session, how to maximize the game economy with ad monetization. This features Sydow, I hope I've pronounced that correctly, from Annie, who are our track sponsor. Lexi, I should say. Lexi, are you here? Welcome to the conference. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here. I'm going to get out of the way now and let you talk to our wonderful viewers.
Amazing. Thank you for having me. I will now share a presentation. Great. So thank you guys all for having me. I'll take you through a presentation from App Annie on how to maximize the game economy with ad monetization. So a quick disclaimer, I'll just give you guys a few moments to read that. All right, so I'm Lexi Sydow, so good job on the pronunciation, that was really good. I'm the Senior Market Insights Manager at App Annie. I'm one of the lead analysts working with our mobile data, and of course, get the privilege of dealing with a lot of gaming data, which is very fun. App Annie is the mobile performance standard. We help businesses achieve mobile success through our data and insights platform. Okay, so first I wanted to kind of take us through a quick kind of leveling the playing field right now, just what's the state of mobile gaming and mobile in general, and then specifically looking at H1, so kind of taking it within the COVID-19 timeframe. So mobile is the world's most popular form of gaming. So we've taken a look at mobile gaming versus all other gaming combined by consumer spend through the app stores. And so this indicates how there's such a big gap between the two. And so mobile gaming is about 1.5x App Store consumer spend. So that's not even inclusive of the advertising spend through in-app ads. 1.5x all other games, forms of gaming combined. So that's PC Mac gaming, handheld console, as well as home console. And in 2020 alone, we expect over $100 billion to be spent on mobile games. Okay, so this is another view, generally speaking, for mobile. So what we see here is kind of taking you through H1, actually from H2 of last year all the way through H1 of this year. And what we can see is that there's generally been an increasing trend in weekly time spent on mobile devices. And then when you get to the new year during COVID, we do see this acceleration and ramp up. So COVID sort of building on those kind of already existing mobile habits that people are spending more time on their devices. And we see that we reached a peak globally in March, where we saw that was a 25% increase in the weekly time spent of H2. The weekly average, and we saw that during H1 2020, consumers on Android devices spent over 1.6 trillion hours on mobile, which is incredibly important for advertising. So that's another reason why we call out the time spent figure. This is another view where we look at markets kind of impacted by COVID in varying phases, and it's showing the average time spent per day on your mobile phone. So globally, we spend about 4 hours and 20 minutes on average each day on our mobile devices, and that's a lot higher in some markets like Indonesia, which is topping about 6 hours a day for an average. And that's when you start to look at that, it's quite impressive, because if you consider that, you know, if we're all sleeping those 8 hours a day that we think we hopefully are getting, the average time we're spending, those 4 hours and 20 minutes, is representing over 25% of our daily kind of waking hours, which is pretty sizable. And this has grown 20% from 2019. So kind of seeing that acceleration of about 3 to 4 years of mobile habits during the pandemic. And when we look at mobile gaming, this is looking at the growth in downloads, which is the lighter purple, and then the growth in consumer spend, the darker purple, across key markets. So we're seeing both more games being downloaded during this time in H1 of this year versus H1 of 2019. And we're also seeing that more consumer spend is flowing through the app stores. And globally, that looks like over 26 billion downloads of new, and these are new downloads. So it's not including a reinstall or an app update of any kind. It's completely kind of net new download, which is 20% growth from H1 of last year. And then over $37.5 billion spent through just in-app purchases through the app stores. And also what we're seeing is that mobile gamers are also looking beyond their go-to game. So we've seen an increase in the number of games that are being actively played each month versus 2019. So that's as high as a 35% increase in the number of games being played in markets like India, and it's around 13% in the US. So consumers are actively seeking out new games, and it's not just playing the same games they've been playing, like Candy Crush, for instance. In terms of mobile advertising, we also wanted to call out the potential market here for consumer spend. So in 2020, we forecast for this year that over $240 billion will be spent on mobile ads in apps and games. Games do command a large portion of time spent and are a mobile kind of leader. So we expect to see a sizable amount of this pool there. And that's a 26% year-over-year growth from what we saw in 2019. And to kind of put that in perspective with what we see from consumer spend through the app stores, this $240 billion is roughly 1.7x the app store spend. So we forecast that we'll see a total of around $140 billion in the app stores in 2020 this year. And now I'll take you quickly through, we just launched a new product called GameIQ. So I've got a ton of great insights coming up on some of the really awesome ways that you can slice and dice this data and get really granular and see some really interesting trends. But I just wanted to quickly give an intro, since it is a new kind of product, on what this is and how you can use it. So starting with sort of that problem. So historically, we had more core gamers on gaming with a console typically, or PC Mac, for instance. But nowadays, we have a lot younger people playing games on a mobile device, as well as older people, and a lot of hyper casual or casual gamers. And that's sort of what mobile has done, is democratize gaming, which I know a lot of the gaming pubs as a part of this conference can probably feel. And as a part of that, there's a plethora of different types of games. We have, within the casual segment alone, there's ASMR, we have word games, music, puzzle, runner, sandbox, Tamagotchi, and there's a very long list. So it's definitely proliferated into a much bigger market with lots of different kind of niches to fit different tastes and preferences. So what that means is that there's naturally questions that come up while strategizing new launches, like, how can we size up the market opportunities today in the most granular way? And for instance, are match 3 puzzle games or match and build puzzle games growing faster? And the differences between those two, because when you're launching that new game, it is important to make sure that you're comparing to the market trends that really suit your specific category of game, as well as looking at the larger market overall. But having both is really important. So other questions are, what are the design features, monetization mechanics that work inside such a game? And then you can take that a little bit deeper. Do starter packs or loot boxes monetize users best in Brazil? Which in-game features drive user engagement the most? So these types of questions were really the impetus for us to produce GameIQ, which is our new standard in-game classification. So we've talked with, had dozens of conversations with some of the leading game publishers in the world, and we've created a technically ambitious and massively scalable game classification system where we have over 28,000 games tagged. And what's great is that we can layer this on top of our kind of leading market estimates so that people can get deeper value from our data and our reports. And as a data analyst, I will say that you can spend hours and hours of time playing with the data to slice it in the ways that you want. And for me, using the GameIQ data even prior to our launch was, saved me a ton of time. And I was able to do a lot of really cool things. So from a practitioner, this is fantastic. So this is what kind of a high level view, right? So we've got casual, casino, core, that's the class. Those kind of colored bubbles would be the genres. So you can see we've done quite a bit of tagging of genres. And then within those genres, we have multiple subgenres. So one example is, within core games, we have shooter games, but then within shooter, there's also, we segment by cover fire, first person, hunting, sniper, and others. So we're getting really deep in the ways that we can analyze this data. Another part of this is that we have tags, and this is really cool. So we have all these different tags where we categorize by theme or setting, like home design games or sci-fi or modern military, and we also have IPs that are being tagged. as well as gameplay. So AR is a tag, auto battle, tournaments, art style, if it's 2D or 3D, how realistic it is, as well as monetization. And that's the focus for the rest of this presentation, where we look at some of the tags of how games are monetizing. And what's awesome is that you can segment by core or casual or casino or any of the genres and subgenres to really get granular and some really rich insights. So as an example, so Marvel Strike Force, for instance, the default would be that this in the app stores comes up as a role-playing game. And with GameIQ, what we've done is we've said it's first a core game, and then it's role-playing, and then we take it a step further and say it's a turn-based game. Plus, here are 19 different tags as to different features that are present in this game that can help it succeed. And so for the purpose of this track, we've looked at some of the monetization mechanics. Okay, so now I'll show you sort of how to understand gamer preferences to optimize monetization, leveraging a lot of these great insights that come from GameIQ. So this is a really interesting view. So we're able to see how gamer preferences vary by region. So as many of you guys would expect, when you look at downloads, and we segment this by downloads, by time spent, and consumer spend. So we see the bulk of downloads come from casual games typically, but you start to see variation in these markets. So Japan, South Korea, Indonesia, seeing a relatively higher level of downloads coming from core games. In terms of time spent, as you'd expect to start to see more time spent coming from core games, but still the bulk from casual typically. That changes in Japan, South Korea, and Indonesia as well. And then when you look at consumer spend, we really start to see that's where core punches above its weight relative to, say, downloads. But then also what's really interesting here, not only just the differences among markets and how much consumer spend is dominated by, say, core games versus casual, but I'd like to draw your attention to just casino games in the US. So they represent 22% of consumer spend in the US. However, only 4% of downloads. So they're really over-indexing for that consumer spend factor. And that's through the app stores. This is another really cool view to show sort of how audience attention is changing based on subgenre. So the grouping of those games that kind of all clump together under these subgenres. And we're looking at this from the active users, so that kind of the breadth of engagement, if you will, and then the average time per user, which is the depth of that engagement on a per user basis. And one of the interesting insights here is that we see from during H1 of this year compared to H1 of last year, Battle Royale really saw strong growth in both per user engagement and the time each user spending, but also in the amount of users. So moving a bit from the niche player to an attention leader and a bit more mainstream. And then when we look at casual games, we can see that casual within the simulation genre, the sandbox subgenre actually has seen strong growth, again, in both the average time per user and the active users, the total user base. And that, as a result, it's moved from kind of that average performer subgenre category to the challengers category box, that kind of quadrant in the bottom right. And again, within the casual genre, we see puzzle games, and specifically card and board games, have seen phenomenal growth in active users. So that's another really strong example of a category moving from kind of that average performer area to a challenger area. And really, it's not that people are spending a lot more time necessarily, which could be something to consider for growth mechanics going forward, but it's that you're reaching this massive audience base here. All right, another really interesting view that's really important when considering monetization mechanics as well is just what features are included in games that are driving engagement. So we looked at the top games by time spent and pulled out these features, the competitive, or in core games, what we saw was that the competitive multiplayer features and events were the most common among the top performing games for time spent. Followed by customization, leaderboards, and guilds and clans. This is different when you look at casino. So when we look at casino games, leaderboards are the most effective feature for kind of driving that engagement in games, and followed by daily and login rewards, and then followed by friend invites. And for casual games, it's also, there's a little bit more variety among those features, but customization is the key one, followed by leaderboards and events. And when we look at monetization methods, this is particularly interesting. So this view is where we're looking at the monetization method among core games. So here what we see is that generally speaking across the markets analyzed as well as the worldwide view, we see that gacha loot boxes are actually the leading monetization method among core games. And advertising is another area that I want to call out because these are the top core games by consumer spend. So that's consumer spend through the app stores, through in-app purchases. And advertising is indicating that kind of hybrid model taking hold. And if we were to do the same analysis among, say, casual games, we'd see advertising be a much bigger component. It might be the leading monetization method among them. And another kind of way you can cut this data is to look at it by the country basis. So what methods are leading in what markets, and where are markets over-indexing in their use of certain monetization methods? Or on the flip side, another way to look at it is like which monetization methods are resonating with core gamers in that market best. So in this case, in China, we see gacha loot boxes, starter packs, VIP, and cosmetic items are particularly resonating well and are used in many of the top games by consumer spend. And then lastly, I do want to call out that within the advertising area, so games that are also core games that are monetizing through the app stores, but then also leveraging advertising, we see that markets like Brazil, the US, UK, Germany, and France are over-indexing in their use of advertising alongside in-app purchases, which shows the hybrid model working quite well in those markets. However, when you look at kind of those pink bars, which is APAC markets, it's not as doing as well or used as frequently. So that's an important characteristic to know in terms of monetization, especially if you're a publisher looking to bring your game overseas. Another view that we have here is how this data, when looking at your monetization methods, can help you uncover new market opportunities. So this is another view similar to the quadrant view we had before, but this is a view of monetization where we're looking at active users and revenue. So you're able to get a nice view of average revenue per user, or ARPU. Among casual games, we saw that the puzzle genre performed particularly well and saw strong growth year over year, kind of hitting into that heavy hitters quadrant a bit farther. And then among core, we see that RPG is the one that's actually moved over the last 12 months from an ARPU leader into that kind of heavy hitter category, seeing greater revenue per active user. We also can see, based on subgenres or genres, and this one is hyper casual, how it kind of spreads across different markets. So it's really good to know for publishers looking to gain market share. And for instance, hyper casual games, the US is the #1 market for both downloads and spend. However, represents only 15% of total downloads, which is good to note for other publishers looking to as far as a large global footprint. However, they do occupy about 40% of consumer spend. So that's really important to note. If you're monetizing through the app stores as a hyper casual game, you'd be remiss to miss out on the US market. And then we can look at this among sliced by where are the apps coming from, where are they published. So among these markets that we analyzed, many of the top hyper casual games being downloaded come from publishers in France. And this is another slightly different view where we're able to look at a subgenre battle royale within the core class and action genre by downloads. And this is specifically showing that in India, they're #1 by downloads and #12 by consumer spend through the app stores. Oops, actually wanted to call it quickly. We also see more variation among the publishers of these battle royale games, with China and Singapore leading the pack. However, there is, as you can see by these brightly colored bar charts, so there's a lot of variation there. And in the US, we actually see US publishers kind of occupying a greater relative percentage of those battle royale games. And I will run through the last little bit on in-app advertising. So we conducted a survey of Americans on kind of their sentiment towards monetization in mobile apps and games. And actually 70% of Americans said that they would either prefer just to have ads or have a mix of ads and in-app purchases, which was pretty interesting. So they prefer that hybrid model. We also saw that relative to games, that they had an especially positive attitude towards rewarded video ads. Around 23% of all mobile gamers said that they liked rewarded video ads, and that was a lot higher among the hardcore gamers, almost at about 40%. We also saw that for games that added an SDK, an ad SDK, and started to monetize through ads, that they actually saw downloads and MAU grow in the months after installing that ad SDK. And we'll end on just a couple of kind of market level pieces here. So we took a look at the top 500 games by Google Play downloads, and actually 93% of them monetized through in-app advertising. And a lot of those games are casual games, but an important thing to note from the competitive landscape. And then also just as a kind of looking at how things are playing out, we've seen a lot of research around marketing budgets being reduced during COVID, and kind of countering that trend is we've actually seen mobile ad placements grow during the pandemic. So January to June, we saw a 70% increase in mobile ad placement, driven by interstitial ads, which grew 205% in the US, kind of taking over more market share from the video ads. And the trend held true when we looked at Japan, China, and South Korea. And there was actually stronger growth rate there of 105% in growth in mobile ad placements during this time. So you can take advantage of the increase in mobile ad placements, that kind of 70% growth in the US, as well as the increase in time being spent on your mobile device, which basically creates an opportunity where there's actually more kind of disparate data to analyze and optimize if you're monetizing through advertising. And so we offer a new product called App Annie Ascend that allows you to streamline your ad analytics. Head to appannie.com/ascend if you want more information there. And then next steps with some of the GameIQ data I covered in this. If you want more information on the product, head over to bit.ly/GameIQ App Annie. Or if you want our latest report, which is free to download and has a lot of great insights, some of which I included here, head to bit.ly/report GameIQ. And we break things down by subgenre and lots of fun things with the tags.
Thanks, Lexi. That was great. We do have 7 or 8 minutes left for a few questions. I've got a couple actually.
Sure.
You've mentioned that the mobile games community have responded fairly positively to this growth in advertising for monetization. That seems to that's slightly different to how gamers often react to in-app or in-game advertising in the console PC market. Why do you think the mobile games community is more willing to accept in-game advertising?
That's a great question. I think part of it is just, I would imagine it's sentiment. So overall on a mobile device, I think there's a natural exchange that can be made when you get value for the service that you're deriving, whether it's an app or a game, and kind of shifting that cost from the consumer to an advertiser. And that's what we saw when we surveyed Americans about mobile ads, and the sentiment towards how they monetize is that the 40%, it was about closer to 50%, prefer just to see ads than to actually pay through the app stores. So I think that's part of it. And then as far as within console, I think it goes back to a little bit of what you're doing, right? Like, so freemium is the bulk of consumer spend, and downloads actually for free and freemium for downloads for gaming. So you're getting a free game, and so you have to pay for in-app purchases.
I get it. Yeah, that's
on console, you had to buy the game itself, and so maybe seeing the ads after paying for the game outright doesn't feel quite as good as if you're
Sure.
technically playing the game for free, even if you pay for purchases or watch ads in it.
And obviously, there has been some criticism and analysis of the loot box mechanic for monetizing games, whatever type of games they are. Are you seeing any kind of slowdown in desire from games companies to want to have loot boxes and perhaps switch more towards other monetization models because of the fear of criticism or legislation?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we've learned, I think in mobile is there is that kind of legislation or changes are kind of something that you have to be ready for. We are seeing them to be actually the #1 monetization method used in core games still across most markets, and Japan being the highest as far as the total games using. We are seeing more diversification though in the types of monetization strategies. I can't say that they're necessarily switching for other strategies, but I think as a general trend, we're seeing more sort of leveraging other types of monetization methods alongside these. But as far as what we're seeing is there's still a dominant way of monetizing users.
Okay, and we've got, in a similar area, we've got a question here from Emil Funday Factory. It says, how do you gather monetization data on the ad revenue from the loot box side of things? He says, given that this is generally not something you can see on App Annie.
Correct. So what our GameIQ product is doing is we've tagged the games that contain loot boxes, but the consumer spend data that I've cited throughout is actually just through in-app purchases still. So you're right. We cannot see that direct consumer spend through the loot boxes, but we can show you the engagement metrics that associate with those types of, you can filter in our product by games that have loot boxes, and then you can look at the engagement over time and also look at perhaps the in-app purchases alongside that.
Okay. There's another question here about what growing markets could a game developer or publisher be targeting. I noticed when you were giving us the update about the increase in the amount of hours being used, that Indonesia was spending more time on games than anywhere else. But is there a market or a couple of markets or a region that you would advise mobile developers to target when they're looking at additional monetization?
Absolutely. I mean, we could talk about this at length. So a quick summary, I guess, is I would say Brazil is a big market that we're seeing a lot of growth generally across mobile, but also in gaming. Definitely a bit higher indexing for core games as well than, say, Western markets like the UK and the US. Ultimately, I think a big thing as well is it depends on what type of games you're publishing, because what we're seeing is that the US for a long time was, and it still is in many respects, dominated by a lot of casual games, but has moved significantly more towards core gaming on a mobile device, whereas APAC's always been a bit more of a leader in that area. So as far as kind of the US is, would be considered a bit more of an opportunity in a market for core gaming, especially when you start looking at some of the games that have migrated from, say, console to mobile. We've seen really successful launches in APAC, and actually we've seen some really successful launches with like Call of Duty in the US. So, and I think Battle Royale is a great example of taking hold in Western markets like the US and Brazil. So we could go on for days on this topic. I encourage whoever asked that question also to look at appindy.com/insights. We have a ton of free reports and analyses up that will help there. But very quick sort of high level synopsis.
Very good. And one last question. Which ad formats are proving the most popular with gamers?
Yeah, well, what's interesting is that we've seen rewarded video be performing quite well, but also a lot of users report that they haven't seen that ad format yet. So the sentiment's quite positive, especially when you look at kind of hardcore gaming, as well as gamers overall. But then a lot of users actually in casual games say they've just never seen it. So that's kind of that area, I think, of opportunity to potentially trial out with some of those users, given the sentiment has generally been quite positive.
Okay, Lexi, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Thank you also to Annie for being our track sponsor. I'm sure lots of people have made some notes, and your presentation will be shared with all of our viewers and delegates as well. So thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.